Well, folks, welcome to one more edition of Politics and Random. Berto Will is your host. Thank you so kindly for being a part of the show. We are going to have a great show for you today. Welcome aboard, Michael Rudnin. Michael Rudnin says, our healthcare system is seriously screwed up. 3 reschedules at the clinic I usually go to. They are backed all up. Switching new primary care physician. Was sick last Thursday. Not going to see a new doctor at a different location until this Thursday. Just lucky that whatever it is that I have isn't serious enough to need to go to an emergency room. I'll be listening from bed. Thank you so kindly for listening. I want you guys to understand what Brother Rudnin is going through right now. Brother Rudnin is ill. We are in a system that is completely this private healthcare system, which they say we don't want Medicare for all because you're going to somehow get waiting lines as more people go into the system. Here we have a brother that is sick, and he's been sick for 7 days, and he's been looking for healthcare for 7 days, and he is yet unable to get in. Why is it? Is it that somehow America cannot handle it just like we cannot handle the coronavirus? I want you guys to understand the pilfering that occurs in America today, folks. That's not the subject of our discussion today. This is not the subject of our discussion today. But when you see what is happening to everyday Americans and how we are lied to into believing that somehow things are so much better because we are a private system, okay? It is sad. It is sad that we fool ourselves into a substandard system. We didn't have to be here. We did not have to have a substandard system. We didn't have to have a system that doesn't work for most Americans. But we chose to have this system out of fear of a fallacy sold by the plutocracy that somehow having a healthcare system similar to what industrialized countries have throughout the world would not be right for us. We have to wake up. We have to ensure that we get healthcare so that Michael Rudnin, Brother Rudnin, when he's ill, when you are ill, when you need support, it is there for you. But that is what we're living through today. This private system that is supposed to be the best in the world, you cannot put this on government control of healthcare. This is private sector control of healthcare where we can only have things profitable first. In other words, the reason Brother Rudnin cannot get a doctor is that we create false shortages. Something in our capitalist economy, it is called false scarcity. We love scarcity because with scarcity comes higher prices, with less work, with less productivity, with less product needed. That is why when in our economic system, even if we can have demand for a whole lot of stuff, we can control and make more by the fluctuation in prices. In other words, nothing is static as far as the capitalist is concerned. We can always profit off of you, and we always win. That is our system. And until one of the basic reasons this can continue to happen is because fundamentally our education system was designed to keep us stupid. Our educational system was designed to keep us stupid because if we knew too much, what it then meant is that somehow if we knew too much, we could actually change the system. And if we changed this system, oh my God, if we change this system, the plutocrats could no longer take advantage of us. It is essential that we understand all of this. So what is the program about today? What is our program about today? Title of the show today is Professor Explains Flaws in Biden's Latino Outreach. Trump is no FDR-Churchill, but a weak Mussolini. Dr. Manuel Pastor points out the flaws in Biden's Latino outreach. Pundits discuss Trump versus Churchill or Mussolini and his profound weakness. Anand Giridharadas deconstructs the fraud and toxic false masculinity that defined Trump. Steve Schmidt, Trump is no FDR nor Churchill, but would likely be a Mussolini, a weak one. Not that Mussolini was strong. You know, all these strong men are really not strong. I don't know why they call them strong men, because we have to remember they are not strong. Repeat after me. They are not strong. They're wusses that eventually are brought down. Professor Dr. Manuel Pastor discusses the diverse Latino community and what are the very important issues within the community the Biden campaign is missing. He said, they are learning on the job but must speed up what they're doing. So what we want to start is we want to start with Anand, because what Anand's piece, I think, was, you remember that thing? Was just marvelous. Anand's piece was just marvelous. So let's listen to Anand, because it's a very important piece that I want everybody to take a look at, and then we'll take it on the other side. So here we go. Anand Giridharadas had a very, very great interpretation of what Donald Trump really is. Let's listen to that and then take it on the other side.
When shocking events just keep coming one on top of the other and breaking news feels like history unfolding at high speed, it is very, very difficult to try to find the perspective that allows you to take it all in. Most of us simply cannot do it. My next guest can. He summed up the last 10 days this way. He hosted a super spreader event to honor a justice who would have the government control your body but refuse the duty to care for it. And when the virus he helped go around came around, he availed of the health care he would deny others, financed by the taxes he refuses to pay. Joining us now, Anand Giridharadas, MSNBC political analyst and publisher of the Inc. newsletter. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for explaining it all to me so clearly and in such an economically written piece.
I think what's so interesting in the way you set it up is that part of why this is happening, part of why we're having, these half comic, half absolutely terrifying Mussolini-esque scenes on the balcony of the White House is it benefits Donald Trump for us to be living in this eternal present every day. And so I was just reflecting, trying to make sense of it myself. And just over the last week to 10 days, as you sort of referenced, if you just look through what we have lived through in those 10 days, it started with the peaceful transfer of power stuff. Remember that, right? Like, we might not have a free and fair election, alarm bell, alarm bell. And then quickly it was the tax story. And then quickly it was the debate story and the bullying. We forgot about the prior two things. And then the president got COVID. And so I started thinking about these kind of four events, the peaceful transfer of power, the taxes, the debate, the COVID. And it suddenly just had this epiphany of like, this is all the same story. This is all the same story of a masquerade of strength. This is the story of a president who knows he's losing in terms of the election and is therefore not trying to become a strong man because he is a strong man, but trying to become a strong man because he knows he's on the way out and needs to cling unlawfully. On the taxes, the New York Times reporting, I was wrong in my initial reaction to that story. I felt it was about, rigging the system, and sure it is, about plutocratic, maneuvering. But the New York Times people who broke that story went on the Daily podcast and were like, this is actually not quite about that. This is about the fact that the guy makes no money. He's not paying taxes because he's a brilliant con artist. He does a little bit of that, but he actually doesn't make profit. Like he's not a businessman. So weakness inverted into this masquerade of strength as a businessman. The debate, anybody who's ever been bullied, and I count myself among those millions of Americans, knows that the strength you experience when you're being thrown into the locker or being talked over in the meeting or being roughed up by the police is actually someone's terror of weakness, inverted again, performed as strength. And finally, with the president getting this disease, he has this disease because he is more afraid, Lawrence, of not being seen as a man than dying. He's certainly not afraid of killing you and me and 210,000 other Americans through neglect and manslaughter via policy. But I don't think he's afraid of killing himself if the price would be to avoid what he feels is the humiliation of wearing a mask and submitting to common sense and care for others. And it just became for me this moment of thinking about America's cultural crisis, of kind of weakness masquerading as strength.
You write that it seems clear that his illness represented the death of a certain widespread and catastrophic kind of masculinity.
There was this moment, I don't know if you remember this one or were lucky enough to be passed by it. Robert O'Neill, the former Navy SEAL who claims to have shot the bullet that killed Osama bin Laden in 2011, not long ago tweeted a photo of himself in an airplane, not wearing a mask, with in the background an older guy, perhaps a veteran with a U.S. Marine Corps hat, who was properly wearing a mask on this Delta flight. And Robert O'Neill, using a vulgarity, essentially says, I'm not a wuss. That's not the actual word, but let's say that's what he was going for. And again, I just had this moment of thinking, as a man, wow, what is wrong with our culture of masculinity in this country, where even Robert O'Neill, after shooting and killing Osama bin Laden, most wanted terrorist alive, does not feel enough of a man to not take that photo and brag about risking everybody's life around him. Donald Trump is the head of a snake, but our whole system, our whole culture needs a reckoning.
That is so important what Anand Giridharadas had to say there, because again, you would think the masculinity culture, and you have to, and it's a culture, it's not a being, it's a culture. And it's a dangerous culture. And so a lot of times that's why I said, we need to have, you take a look at who handled the coronavirus better throughout the world. The women handled it better. Ask yourself why. And we have the macho men that did the screwiest job of it. Donald Trump, Putin, Bolsonaro, and ¿cómo se llama that guy in England? Johnson in England. So, you take a look at the people that did the worst with this thing, and it's the macho men that did worse. And Donald Trump, again, he's them all. Ask yourself another question. Donald Trump, he uses his macho because he's a businessman, etc. Ask yourself a question. You can actually see what Exxon produces, what Shell produces, so forth. What the hell does the Trump enterprise produce of value to the average American? Absolutely nothing of value. And he got it perfect, and Anand got it right. He doesn't make any profit because he doesn't make anything. It's a facade. It's a facade. A facade cannot run a successful country, and that is where we're at today. Absolutely, that is where we're at today. Welcome aboard, Tank 28, Nanette Bird-Smith, Michael Radnin, Idalina Oliveira, Blair Hafley, welcome aboard. Para ver quién más está aquí. Bruce Pollard, let's see, Blair Hafley, Lee Grant. Who else is here? Okay, I think I got everybody. And by the way, Michael Rudnin, you just put those links in as you see fit, because you give us some very interesting links and necessary links many times. But as I said in that video, right, there's this sort of masculinity that goes out there. And if you saw what Trump did yesterday, it was that macho thing that he wanted to do. I'm in control. I am the boss. I am the you know what, right? But the truth of the matter is, no, he has done everything wrong. Look at how Germany solved their problem, a woman. Look at how New Zealand solved their problem, a woman. These are the people that have had the best successes, right? So let's be clear here. Hi, Hope Bleeker. How you doing, my friend? Welcome aboard. So we have to really be careful of and Jackie Odell, welcome aboard. He has done it all wrong. You're absolutely right, Mademoiselle Odell. He did it all wrong. Anyhow, Steve Schmidt. You know I love Steve Schmidt. That's my favorite, one of my favorite Republicans. Look, I want to remind all folks about this. There are a lot of Republicans jumping on the Biden bandwagon now, right? That's how bad Trump is. That is how evil Trump is. That is how disgusting, that is how incompetent he is, that they really would have preferred their brand not be associated with Trump, right? So they're running to Biden because Biden is sort of a moderate centrist. And, the Democratic Party knew what it was doing. They figured that, okay, everybody know what Biden represents. And yes, he'll be able to attract a lot of the not centrist, but center-right Republicans. So we'll deal with that. I just want to remind all my progressives of one thing. We love to have all those Republicans come on board. We love it. We love it. But don't fool yourself and ever once believe that they are your policy friends, because they're absolutely not our policy friends. They are our political friends. There's a difference between having someone as your political friend and your policy friend. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but it is a difference. We need them politically to win. Now, when we start going down to policy, they are going to be an enemy like you'd not imagine. But you know what? By then, I would hope that progressives would have enough of ourselves together that we can overcome what got us here. Because again, we will continue to win if we get our policies effected early, because the policies that we represent are the policies what Americans want. You look at every poll that's asked, and that is the reality. Now, Tank 28 is going on his tantrums again. Let me first say we don't care about the fallacies that come out of the right wing. I will talk to you about all these things no matter what, but you're simply wrong, Tank 28. But anyhow, let's go ahead and listen to what Steve Schmidt has to say, and then we'll move on from there. Steve Schmidt has been doing some good work. Check this out. Steve Schmidt knocks another one out of the park. Donald Trump is back at the White House. Donald Trump put on a real spectacle, and let's see what Steve Schmidt thought about it. Let's see what he really, really thought about it, because what Donald Trump did, well, let's go ahead and do this and then take it on the other side.
Did Mr. Hannity's comparison of Trump with FDR and Churchill also occur to you as you were taking in the White House South Lawn tableau this evening?
His leadership is very much the opposite of FDR and Churchill, and it's just a desecration of history and the memory of two of the world's greatest statesmen that anybody would ever compare the recklessness of Trump's behavior, his malice, his meanness, his irresponsibility to FDR, to Winston Churchill, who saved the world from the Oval Office. Actually, FDR sat behind the same desk, the Resolute desk, a gift to this country from the timbers of a British ship, the Resolute, that was given to us by Queen Victoria as a gift. And FDR sat behind that desk with Churchill at the side. They would mix cocktails every evening at 5 o'clock as they plotted to make the world safe for democracy. And we're looking at somebody in these pictures who less than a week ago threatened violence in this country if he were to lose an election. Somebody who activated every militia group in this country. They all believed that they heard a lock and load, weapons to the ready order. We saw this stunt, the drive around Walter Reed, endangering the Secret Service agents. It's just complete and total foolishness from the beginning of this crisis. It's tragic. If we had the same mortality rates in America that the Germans had, there'd be 150,000 more of us alive today than there are. We'll have 100,000 more dead Americans. We have a broken economy. The American way of life has been fundamentally disrupted, all because of this fool, and that's what he is. I don't use the words lightly. His recklessness has endangered lives, and the idea that he's some type of hero, that he did this for us, that he faced down coronavirus, trying to assume the patina of heroism around this coward is just an appalling spectacle to watch, as is my colleague and partner Reed Galen today, looking at the scene of Trump from the balcony. He called him Benito Trumpolini. And it is amazing that all of these guys with this autocratic fetish, they certainly do like the balconies, don't they?
They sure do like the balconies. Well, I mean, I look, there's not much more to be said. The one thing that I'm glad he mentioned is it is time for us to start hammering in whenever Donald Trump said he did a great job, then how comes that our death rate is so much higher than every other industrialized country? Does that say something about you, or does it say something about them? I think it says something about Donald Trump being very, very lousy at being the president, at taking care of the American people. It is important, it is imperative that these are the message we leave Americans with, because Donald Trump is going to put a show on trying to show some sort of strength. Well, we don't know if he's going to make it. That's the reality. He's on some heavy drugs, and coronavirus could give him some pretty bad effects in the next few days. So we hope that doesn't happen to him. But in the process, with the poison that he's going to put out, we have to be ready to answer back. We have to be ready to challenge. We have to be ready to keep Americans informed and not misled by what Steve Schmidt called him. I won't do that. Okay, I want to answer something. Michael Rudnin said something important, and I want to kind of dequalify that. He said, the enemy of my enemy is my friend has been a political thought responsible for most of the damage throughout world history. I'd hope we progressives are above that we focus our government on doing good for the people. I agree wholeheartedly, but I want to give that with a caveat of today. If you take a look at how our Constitution is an aberration in that it created great options for minority rule by the people who owned a lot of property. That's why you can see places like North Dakota, South Dakota, which don't have people, have a lot of land, but 2 senators. So they are misrepresented. They get a proportion of the vote to control this country much larger than their population. So where we see that America is a progressive country, when we ask questions, the way it is governed governed like a plutocracy, because all these small states get 2 senators as well. Because the way we are designed in such a manner that they are overrepresented. We have to form those alliances to break that, and eventually, my expectation, bringing in DC and Puerto Rico as 2 more states that currently are progressives will help that reality. But even that is not enough. In the long run, we are going to need a constitutional change so that we are all proportionally represented. That's the only way we represent a democracy. We needed to have a lot of state control and a lot of states having more power, they say, because of the distance and lack of communication, and people had different identities in different states. But today, you get a job in Wisconsin, you move to Wisconsin from Texas. You get a job in Florida, you move to Florida. You decide that you want more sun, you move to California. So the states don't have the same meaning that they had back then. Not that I thought having some sort of a meaning warranted that you have more power for being a state. I never thought that, but there is an aberration within the Constitution why, for now, the enemy of my friend must be my friend so that I can attain the goals that I intend to get. Hope says, go to the candlelight vigil for equality 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central on Thursday. My friend Gina wrote the brief that is being introduced in the 1st District Court in Boston. Justice Breyer is the gatekeeper for this. We need prayers. They hear the considerations on Friday, October 9th. So join us on Thursday evening to understand what is happening with the ERA. That's the Equal Rights Amendment, folks. Anyhow, let's go ahead. And I want to set this up, first of all. This morning, I watched not the debate, but I watched Biden last night talking to Latinos on the Latinos issue and all of that. And, I was still perplexed, and interesting. I got a publicist from, a publicist sent me an email and said, hey, there's this guy that's given that Biden gave that thing that is willing to discuss this with you. Then I said, wow, that was like, not poetic justice, but that was like divine intervention, right? Just the type of person that I'm looking for to talk to, and here it is. So let me go ahead and bring you Dr. Manuel Pastor. He has a lot to say about how we should, about how Biden is not doing the best with the Latino community, and what should be done. Our expectation is that enough people within the Biden community will see this, and even if it doesn't go directly to the Biden hierarchy, that they will make the changes locally to address the Latino community appropriately. So let's go ahead and do that interview, and then I'll take you on the other side. Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. I'm here with Dr. Manuel Pastor, Professor of Sociology and American Studies and Ethnicity at the University of Southern California. Dr. Pastor, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Glad to be with you.
Look, welcome to Politics Done Right.
Great to be with you.
Okay, look, I have a few questions. First of all, Vice President Biden was in Miami yesterday, and he made an attempt to address the Latino population in what some may say is should have been ago. Tell me, what's your impression of the Biden campaign's address of the Latino population in general?
It's coming very late. You know, one of the things that is really key to understand is that during the primary campaign, Biden's main strengths were with the white working class, white educated voters, and then a very strong group, particularly of Black Southerners, but Black folks around the country, particularly folks who are older. And those are the two bases he's been the most used to appealing to, whereas Bernie Sanders had tremendous appeal, particularly in the Sunbelt states of California, Arizona, Nevada, et cetera, particularly with young Latinos. And so Biden really didn't exercise that muscle. And all of a sudden, here comes a general election campaign in which this Latino vote is both extremely important and extremely diverse. Latinos in Florida, very different than Latinos in Texas or in California. And so they've got a lot of learning to do. And unfortunately, they're learning on the job, and it's coming a little bit late.
No, interestingly, and I don't remember where it was, but when we were talking about, he had sort of a faux pas. I don't know if you remember this incident with regards to the Black vote versus the Latino vote, where he made, in as much as he was right in what he was saying, because Latino is sort of a catch-all thing. You're a white Latino, I'm a Black Latino. The interesting thing about it is we encompass all these different frames that it's like, why did they put things that way in this country? And what he said was, the Black community, in effect, he was trying to say they have a more closer history than, let's say, Latinos from around the hemisphere. What you thought about that?
Well, there were elements of truth to that, and then there's elements of ignoring important things about the Black community. Older Black voters, much more conservative. That's
Right.
who Biden appealed to in South Carolina and through the Black Belt to the South. Bernie, for example, did very well with Black voters in California. There's a reason why California was the birthplace of the Black Panther Party.
Yes.
It's a place that's had more radical politics in the Black community. It's got a kind of younger edge, more progressive edge to it. And there's actually a really big immigrant presence in the Black community that gets ignored. Afro-Latinos, to be sure, but also Haitians, folks from Africa, et cetera. And I think sometimes there's a reductionism and not an understanding of the diversity of the Black American community. At the same time, man, Latinos are extraordinarily diverse. Cubans in South Florida, very different than Chicanos in East Los Angeles. And I think what people are forgetting is also the presence of Latinos in states in the Midwest. So one of the things I think that is a really important thing that the Biden campaign has forgotten about. They think that when they're campaigning for Latinos, they've got to appeal to Cubans in Miami, Mexican Americans in Arizona. They're forgetting that in Minnesota, 3% of the citizen voting age population, not just the overall population, but the electorate, 3% in Minnesota is Latino, 3.5% in Michigan, over 5% in Pennsylvania. And that's a population that's largely Puerto Rican and immigrant Latino, but naturalized and able to vote. And if you're running a campaign that's all about the white working class and alienates Latinos in those Midwest states, you're losing a potential margin of victory that you need.
Actually, though, that is the margin of victory, right? Because technically speaking, we've always talked about I mean, if you listen to some of the, let's say, some of the black intellectuals, they kind of believe it is time for the types of Biden to forget about this working class white vote that they think is, you should expend a lot more effort on, let's say, the Latino vote or the non-voting black vote. Is that something that you would agree with as well, or?
I tend to be a little bit more of the rather than either or, both and. We need to make sure that we've got strength in the Black community. That's been the bedrock of the Democratic Party, particularly Black women. And of course, that loyalty got rewarded with a vice presidential nod for Kamala Harris, and the fact that someone like my good friend Congresswoman Karen Bass was so seriously considered, along with others, for that position. We've got to make sure that we've got strengths in white working class communities. The fact that the Democratic Party cannot appeal to those communities and instead lets a full-fledged racist, Donald Trump, grab their attention and appeal to their basest instincts rather than their highest hopes, that's a problem. But we also have to make sure that we're reaching out to the Latino community, and not just where it's the expected vote, but in places like the Midwest, where it's a very different and unexpected vote. And frankly, the Democrats actually have a decent chance, for example, right now in Texas, perhaps not to win, but at least to make it a serious enough race that the Republicans waste resources there trying to defend a state that's been red for years.
Interestingly, it's not that Texas is a red state, it's that Texas is a non-voting state. I'm here, resident in Houston, Texas, and we actually believe we can make it happen this year. But you brought up an issue that I think is sort of subliminal that I want to tackle, because let's go back to the white working class and how
Can I
could
say a word there about Texas before we jump to that
Yes,
question?
please
Because
do.
I think that's the other thing, and you should speak to this as well. When you start to think about Texas and what's been the traditional Hispanic vote, right? The way that that's been mobilized by the Democrats has been like in the Rio Grande Valley, and they have run a campaign focused on sort of generally folks who were immigrants and naturalized, and some folks who kind of long Tejanos. They've never really run a millennial campaign trying to go after the young Texas Latino electorate and activate them around progressive issues that they care about. Immigration and DACA, to be sure, but education, the economy, housing, etc. And one of the things that I think we're beginning to see is a different kind of Latino electorate being woken up in Texas. And I think that understanding the diversity of the Latino community, not just nationwide, but even in a place like Texas, and understanding that you can win if you motivate those young Latinos to go to the polls.
Dr. Pastor, that is a very important note. And the reason why it is so important as well is that you will see the older Latinos in places like Texas have not a majority leaning towards the Republican, but a substantial number leaning towards Republican because of that religious conservatism, while the younger Latinos wouldn't have that particular, well, I won't call it a hang up, but anyway. But let's go ahead and I want to go back to the white working class, because it's an interesting thing as far as how did the Democrats lose the white working class? And I kind of, I don't know, in your narrative, I kind of hear a sort of a leftward inclination, and I want to see if you agree that that probably has to do with an establishment Democratic Party trying to hit more the needs trying to hit more of the needs of some of the, let's say, the upper classes, the business classes, etc. Do you agree with that at all, or?
I think that's an element of it. I think that the biggest problem is the failure to talk about race and racism. And I think to understand that the fundamental appeal of the Republican Party for years has been about protecting white privilege for middle class and working class folks, and using that as a ruse to actually protect corporate privilege. And what's gone on with that is that the Democrats, traditional mainstream Democrats, have thought, well, if we don't talk about race, what we can do is talk about economic issues, and we'll pull people over in that direction, failing to realize that the way that you inoculate people from the lures of racism is by talking about the ways in which you have common interest with other groups, the ways in which racism is being used to divide people, the ways in which you need to recognize the humanity of others to be able to truly challenge the inequality that's happening at an economic level. And so I think the mainstream Democrat problem has been to not center race in the conversation. And instead, what the Republicans have done is go from a dog whistle to bullhorn, and now with Trump, full-fledged fireworks around race.
Dr. Pastor, you said something in there that I hope people really realize, and that is something that I've been preaching for a long time. They use race as a tool. In other words, they're not doing a damn thing for those working class white people in Ohio or Michigan or Wisconsin, but they're using their votes to advance corporate advances. You agree?
I agree with that. And I think the challenge for us is even when we see it, how do we make sure that we make the inroads into that population so that they don't get fooled? And I think
Exactly.
that's the reason why I was saying it's a both and strategy. Yes, we need to mobilize communities of color. That's where the growth in the electorate is occurring. That's where there's a lot of sympathies for the Democratic Party. And that's where there's a belief that government, as much as an obstacle and an oppressive tool as it's been for communities of color, can actually also be a vehicle for economic progress. But we can't do that and not say we need to bring along our white brothers and sisters who have been fooled by what the Republicans have been selling for years, and have not the lures of racism have not been addressed by mainstream Democratic leaders. I think that's partly what the Sanders campaign did imperfectly. I think he could have talked even more about race and racism, but by coming back to the economic issues and talking about ways in which race was used to divide. I'm just hoping that Biden realizes that that's as important as making sure that as you know, their ads now in Spanish are done in 3 different accents: Cuban, Puerto Rican, and
And
Mexican.
Mexican.
And
Yeah, I mean, that is
yeah,
funny.
and I mean, that's great, but man, that's pretty token compared to saying, what are the issues that your community
Yes.
faced and need to have addressed?
That is so true. I mean, it's funny that you talk about bringing our white brothers and sisters along, because I wrote a book called "It's Worth It," and the idea was how to talk to your right wing neighbors, assuming that most of your right wing neighbors, in fact, are these white working class folks, and how do you bring them into the fold by talking exactly as you stated there? That is, letting them know, look, it's a ruse, you're being fooled. Donald Trump back in Florida and other places, given you are well, many of Cuban descent remember or have a remembrance of Castro that is not what they would prefer, communism, etc. Now, interestingly, some of them fear all of that, and Donald Trump is trying to hit those buttons for the Cuban Latinos in Cuba right now.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it seems to be playing some. It shocked me because I thought by now younger Cubans, younger Latinos understand what really happened in Cuba. They don't. So why don't you explain to me what do you think is the antidote for what Donald Trump is doing in Florida right now, and specifically with the Cuban communities and those who associate with the Cuban communities?
That pandemic of anti-communism may be as dangerous as some aspects of the COVID pandemic as well, in the sense that it's creating a lot of delusional politics. I mean, a couple things I think are important here. Trump has had some appeal in Florida, particularly in South Florida, because of Cubans who, as you were saying, have Castro in their mind as a dictator. The interesting thing, of course, is that what they're doing is saying, well, we're anti-Castro, and so what we want to do is vote for our own tin pot dictator here in the United
Right.
States. So it's not really sure it's a democratic sympathy, right? The interesting thing about the Cuban American population tends to be right uh, conservatively, politically, on issues having to do with Cuba and foreign policy, but actually also tends to vote for education, tends to vote for a minimum wage, and those sorts of things. There is some generational division where the younger Cubans are not quite as obsessed with what happened in Cuba in 1959 and in the 1960s as the older generation. But a lot of that has been refreshed by people who fled Nicaragua and Venezuela in particular,
Mm-hmm.
and they bring with them too their sort of concerns about whether or not there's a sufficient sort of anti-Maduro, for example, line with regard to Venezuela. So that's going to be a really hard nut to crack. But you have to realize that Cubans are diminishing as a share of the Floridian Latino population. That in Central Florida, there's been a huge influx of
Puerto
Puerto
Ricans.
Ricans
Yeah.
who fled there partly as a result of Hurricane
Mm-hmm.
Maria, but also the sort of traditional move down south from New York. And that population is more liberal, can be easily activated, and can actually find some alliances, particularly with Black communities in Central Florida. And I think the failure to disaggregate these communities and say, well, we're going to make as much inroads as we can with conservative Cubans, but what we really need to do is to animate that part of the vote that we know that we can get if we start talking to them in the language that makes sense to them. And I don't mean just Spanish. I mean the language in which you're talking about protecting immigrants, the language in which you're talking about spending on education so everyone has a chance, the language in which you're talking about a fair wage and making sure that we move away from corporate domination, both in our economy and our politics.
You know, interestingly, you just said, and you don't mean talking to them in Spanish. How would somebody whose name is Schmidt feel if, because his name is Schmidt, that somebody's going to first try to talk to him in German, living here in America? You know, most, I find that a whole lot of Latinos just talk to me in English. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, that's what we speak. You know, but somehow the pandering, and actually the pandering occurs on both sides, right? As far as that is concerned. But
Plus, I had a brother-in-law named Alex Schmidt who was Mexican and whose first language was Spanish.
yeah,
So, somos muy diferentes. We are a very complex and complicated group, Latinos. And I think that moving from, as we said at the beginning, this view that, I mean, because I kept getting, and these are not the questions you're asking, but during the primaries, I kept getting these questions about what is the Latino vote? And I kept saying, what state, what community, what nationality are we talking about? Because we need to figure out what these differences are.
just to let you know, Egberto Willis, Latino. But anyway,
Exactly.
interestingly, here's the thing, because what you said is so important, right? And I think what we are a victim of what the United States has done in categorizing people, right? That is pretty much what happened. Because you're from South or the Cuban island, I mean, or that island, and you just bunch them all together, you know. So
Yeah.
I always found that funny, and then I always found that the misuse of Latino versus Hispano, but you know, that's for
Yeah.
another time. Um, what would, first of all, have you been in touch with the Biden campaign, or attempted to reach a Biden campaign, or use your alliance with Representative Bass maybe to get to him and say, hey, you really need to talk to this guy about doing things this way?
Well, we've been trying to send smoke signals in their direction. Uh, Not too much response so far. I am sort of more deeply embedded in some of the politics that are going on in California. And I think here we've had big inroads, both with the governor, obviously with local and county officials, and our representatives to Congress, so that they understand the issues that are important to Latinos. And they're not always what people think. Immigration is a litmus test because nobody wants to see their grandmother deported. But if you ask people, I'll just give you a little example, Egberto, which I think is
Mhm.
really important. In the state of California, and this has been polling for the last 12 years, there's a couple polls in the United States as a whole which show this to be the case too. But in the last 12 years in California, if you ask the question of Californians, do you consider climate change a very serious issue? And are you willing to basically sacrifice to make sure we do something about it? 50% of white Californians say yes. About 68% of Black and Asian Californians say yes. And nearly 2/3 of Latino Californians say yes. Latinos are environmental voters because they're often bearing the brunt. And you know this from Texas with the Latino communities and Black communities that are these fence line communities right by the refineries. They know what's going on with climate. They know the costs of pollution. They are willing to throw down to make sure that we have a greener planet. And it is no surprise to me that it's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez who's been one of the leading proponents of the Green New Deal in Congress. So you can run an environmental campaign and get Latino voters. We need to complicate who they think these voters are and what issues actually appeal.
That is why it is so important to integrate yourself to actually engage with all kinds of people, because you get these false narratives, you get these false. It's simply you get all these false narratives. Now, Dr. Pastor, we are near the end. I'd like you to tell me something that you wished I had asked you and that I didn't.
Oh gosh, that's one of my favorite questions as well. Um, I'll just kind of say two things. Uh, One is I want to re-emphasize that the Latino vote is important in a place like Texas, where it's nearly a third of the citizen voting age population. It's important in Florida and Nevada, where it's around a fifth. But it's crucial as well in the so-called Democratic blue wall states of the Midwest, where it's ranging between 3 and 5%. And the fact that the Latino campaigns, such as they are, wind up just going to particular states without realizing that there needs to be some advertising and outreach throughout, I think is really, really crucial. The last thing that I would leave you with is something that I think is really important for the Latino community that might be listening as well, which is that it's absolutely crucial for Latinos as we're doing the organizing of our own communities to lift up and challenge the anti-Black racism that has been such a fundamental feature of the United States. We need to do that both because it will help to create ties, as you were saying, between Black Latinos, white Latinos, Latinos who might identify as other or indigenous. But we also need to do it because the kinds of othering and marginalization that Latinos in this country face is actually deeply rooted in our history of genocide and in our history of slavery, Jim Crow, and the marginalization and othering of Black people in the United States. And in fact, since most of us, although there's always been a Latino presence in the United States, or there wouldn't be a state called Texas,
Yes.
or California, or Arizona, or Nevada, or Colorado.
Right.
Even though there's always been a strong Latino presence, most of us came over after the immigration reform of 1965. And that immigration reform owes its roots to the civil rights movement, which challenged the racism and xenophobia that was part of our immigration system before. And it opened up the doors for people to be able to come from Latin America, from all sorts of different countries. And so it's absolutely central for Latinos, even as we're asking for attention to come our way from this democratic campaign, and hopefully from a different kind of government, to at the same time think about the alliances with the Black community and centrally challenge anti-Black racism within the Latino community and anti-Black racism outside of the Latino community that's setting the terrain for us to be either successful or unsuccessful in challenging the xenophobia, exclusion, and othering that our own community faces.
Dr. Manuel Pastor, Professor of Sociology and American Studies and Ethnicity at the University of Southern California. It was my pleasure to have you on Politics Done Right. Thank you so kindly, and be back.
I would hope to, and it feels a little more like this is politics done left, but really glad to be with you. Ha sido un placer. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, hermano.
Nos vemos.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. First of all, I want to say thank you so kindly. Lived It with another super chat today. Super chat from Lived It. Thank you so kindly. Those of you on YouTube, you want to join Lived It and go ahead and hit that $sign and give us a super chat. Of course, you can alternatively go ahead and become a new subscriber to our channel. Cheap. Just click on that join button. We want hundreds of those subscribers. You know, I figure if everybody does a little tiny bit, we can keep doing what we're doing. I can still get ahead and, you know, when this pandemic is over, do what we normally do, fly around the country and do the necessary stories that bring some of them live to these different conferences. There's a lot for us to do. And by the way, we have to gear up because Anybody who thinks after Biden wins, it's over, after Biden wins, and notice I'm not saying if Biden wins, I'm saying after Biden wins in the upcoming landslide, that is when the job begins. And why is it that that is when the job begins? Because we're going to have all those people that have their hands in the jar. We're going to have the Lincoln Project saying, well, we helped get you over the top. We're going to have voters who will never vote for Donald Trump, whatever they're called, RVAP, whatever they're called. We had our hands to help you win this election, which all will be true. But we have to remember the bias that we want from Brother Biden, from Vice President Biden, is the bias towards progressive values, which have been lacking since the inception of Ronald Reagan. I talk a whole lot about that in my book, As I See It, Class Warfare, the Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom, which you can get at our store, of course. You know, I didn't know how much time I had, so I didn't interrupt to do my pitch because it was more important to get the entire message over. That's why I so thank Lived It again for the super chat. But by the way, folks, please go to our store. Go to our store where you can get As I See It, Class Warfare, the Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom. With that book, you can learn what I just talked about, the economic system and what the things that we need to do. Of course, how to convince people about all this stuff. I mean, it's worth it. How to talk to your right-wing neighbor, relatives, and everybody else. That is how you do it. But by the way, let me give you the link directly to that book. It's on Amazon. And by the way, from this link, you can get to all the books. And of course, my other book, which is Lose Weight and Be Fit Now. You know, I had my weight problems, and I no longer have my weight problems. I did it my way. You would read that book and do it your way. You will do it your way, and you'll be successful at doing it your way. Anyway, going back to the politics. So please go to our store. But most of all, those of you that are on YouTube right now, please go ahead and join. Oh, my link didn't go over. My link didn't go over. Let me try that again, because some of the messages to Facebook don't normally make it over. Okay, that is the link for the book. Okay. Now, if you want to go to YouTube and become a subscriber, I need you to become subscribers on YouTube as well. I have a link called politicsdoneright.com/YouTube. politicsdoneright.com/YouTube. Please go there and become a subscriber. It is cheap. It's less than buying me a cup of coffee. And what that does is it ensures that we can continue doing what we're doing. We need hundreds of those. Well, actually, we need thousands of those. You can also become one of our patrons. And here is the link to become one of our patrons. It is politicsdoneright.com/Patreon. politicsdoneright.com/PATREON. And is there anything that I'm missing, guys? If you want to become a member on Facebook, you can go ahead and become a member on Facebook, politicsdoneright.com/Facebook. Folks, we work hard. 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. All this video cut up that we do, cutting it, getting it, taping it, it's a lot of work. It means little sleep. And by the way, since I'm still following my rules and lose weight and be fit now, the one thing I never, ever forget is, in as much as I'm doing all this stuff, to go out there and exercise, to go out there and make it a schedule. You know, my wife always say, you're like a robot, because you follow the rules all the time. You do this, you do that, etc. We can all do that. We can all do that. Okay, continuing. Daniel Ledo, I don't think I've seen you in a while. No, I don't lie to you guys. I've never told you a lie, Daniel Ledo. No, to nobody. Mike Cisak, I've never told you a lie. My conservatives are back in the room again. Okay. Anyhow, guys, look. Let me go through and start answering the questions. John Brennan, per his handwriting notes, personally briefed Obama that the Russians were aware months before the 2016 election of Clinton's plan to vilify Donald Trump by stirring up a scandal claiming interference by the Russian security service. And it was true, right? Of course it was true. So please, folks, stop trying to make things what they're not. It was true. Just like somebody else in here came and said, "Oh, Obama knew about the Russian involvement with Trump." Yeah, he did. And when he was going to make it, public, what did they say? Please don't say anything, Obama. Please don't say anything, or else we're going to say that you're politicizing the vote. Oh, I need to welcome all my people. Welcome Michael Rudnin. Welcome Mike Cizek. Welcome Daniel Ledo. Welcome Brige MCP. Welcome Blair Halfley. Thank you very much for that super chat. Lived it. Anybody else want to do a super chat? Hit that $sign and provide us with that super chat. Help us out. Make us able to continue giving the message. Lived it. Welcome aboard. And thank you again for the... Biden and the Democrats have completely lost me as a Latino voter. Their continuous identity politics have lost what would have been a solidified blue vote with me being 19 in New York City. They are lost. I like how the Republicans always turn something into a negative. Like identity politics is wrong. Identity politics is not wrong. Identity politics should only go away when identities are not what determine your future. Let's give an example. Women. A woman is an identity. That's identity politics. Well, you know what? We better play identity politics with women. Men can't have kids, yet men are the ones who determine how that woman's body is going to be controlled. Men cannot have kids, yet men are going to determine if they can take birth control. So men want to have sex with women. Women say, I am not ready for kids, so I want birth control. And you say, well, I'm not going to allow you to have birth control because that is a form of abortion. Come on. Identity politics is necessary. There are certain things that people of my hue go through that I have to identify differently because you are not going to go through those circumstances that I will. I will not ever go through the circumstances of a woman, ever. So until we get into a form where we can look at the differences in people, whether that is gender, sex, orientation, color, until we can look at those things the same way we look at somebody and say, oh, your eyes are blue or your eyes are orange or whatever, until we can look at it as something non-trivial. Identity politics is important, and I don't think anybody should ever run away from identity politics or somehow think of it as a negative. She's not 19. It's likely a male ink. Lived it. You know what? You may be right, lived it. And Mike says, oh, come on, Egberto, that's not how it works. What are you talking about, my friend? And Brige MCP says, yeah, men can easily have Viagra, LMAO, get it in the mail. You know what was very touching? And I got to get out of here, but here's what was touching. I don't remember what senator asked a male, right? They said, it was somebody, I guess, against abortion or something. And she said, can you tell me any law on the books right now that was written to control any part of a man's body? And that guy who is trying to control a woman's body, he was stunned. He could not think of a law. You can go through every state in the United States and find laws trying to control a woman's body. Birth control, when can she not have a kid? I mean, all kinds of things to control a woman's birth control and all these other things. But for men, niet. And you're going to tell me identity politics doesn't matter? Identity politics is important and should remain active until identities don't matter. Will we ever get to the point where identities don't matter? Yes, we will. We're just not there yet. That's why we have programs like this to let everybody know, you know what? Let's judge everybody by their intellect. Let's judge everybody by what they produce. Let's judge everybody by who they are. And then we'll be fine. My name is Egberto Willies. Wait a minute. I was closing, but I think I saw something. So Mike says, I said, because that prevents conception and impregnation is not the same as abortion. Okay? Selective service registration used to be only men. Good words. Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for the show. Folks, we got to get out of here. My name is Egberto Willies. This is Politics Done Right, and you know how I end this, baby. I am what? Out. We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead, number one, subscribe to our channel, and number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.